my name is Carlos Gabriel Ego and Soga. Please like and subscribe my YouTube channel. My mom made this video for you. So watch and study hard.
Good day, everyone. I am your learning facilitator in the subject Understanding the Self. And for today, we will be talking about the first lesson of Module 1, and that is the philosophical perspective of the self. But before we will continue in the discussion of the first lesson, let us first have a very short recap of what we have discussed last time. And this is about the self and the self concept. So basically, we have learned that self concept is made up of oneself schemas and it interacts with the self esteem, the self knowledge, and also with the social self in order to form the self as a whole. It, it also includes the past, present, and the future selves, where the future selves means the possible selves that represents our ideas of what might become of our future selves. Will this be the future that we are very much looking forward to, or these are the future that we are afraid of becoming? And so our present self is quite particular with the manner of our behavior and in our actions at the same time in order for us to actually achieve the future self that we all want to have. And also, our present self is working so hard to deviate from the future self that we are afraid of becoming. And also we have to understand that in understanding more of our present self, it is very much important to know more of our past self because as we have learned that the self concept is basically form of the basically shaped and form based on the past self, the present self, and of course the future self. So let us go back a bit of our past self in order for us to fully understand the present self that we have so that we will be able to know how we become who we are and how we become what we are as of this very moment. So let's now talk about the nature versus nurture principle. So basically, when we talk about nature, this refers to the person as he developed his or her characteristics biologically. This has something to do with the development of a person from his state of birth, while when we talk about nurture, this refers to the development of the person or of ourself in our characteristics through the different external factors such as our family, the surroundings that we have, the society that we have, and the cultures that we practice. These are basically part of the nurture. So when we say nature, it is the very rewiring, no? And it is influenced by the genetic inheritance and other biological factors. But when we talk about nurture, this is generally taken as the influence of external factors from the moment of our consumption, and set as an example of which are the products of our exposure to the outer world or to our surroundings, our life experiences, and as well as our learning as an individual person. So there. And now let us focus on the present self, our present self rather, and our self identity. So basically, self and self identity is also different. How? Because When we say self-identity, this basically refers to the qualities and the characteristics and the opinions that each make a person unique from the others. This actually makes us distinguishable from the other individuals as well. But when we say self, this is quite deeper when we say self, because this refers to the person of himself or herself or of ourselves which others do not see in us, because this is basically the real self that we have, the real characteristics that we have, and the very personality that we possess. Hence, these are the very specifics of what makes us a person. Okay, so that's basically it. Now let's move forward to the holistic aspect of the self. And in order for us to be able to come up with a holistic self, we have to know that there are these four dimensionalities of the self, and these are the social self, the environmental, and other life factors. What do we mean exactly by all these four dimensionalities? So first things first, let's talk about social factors. What are social factors? So when we say social factors, these are factors that uh, refers to the development of a person, which includes all the person around us. So basically, this includes our family members, our friends, even our professors and our teachers, or even strangers. The whoever it is that could make or create a huge impression or a big impact in our life or in our actions as well. So when we say environmental factors, these are factors in the development of a person that includes the environmental structure. It could be an event or anything which might give an impact on how a person could grow in all aspects of his or her lives. So when we say environmental factors, this could be related to the things that are happening in our surroundings or in our society. Then we have the hereditary factors. And when we say hereditary factors, these are the factors in the development of the person that includes the biological changes. And such includes the growth of the child, or our growth, our changes, physical changes to be very specific, such as if you're a female, you will have your menstruations, and if you're a male, you will have the deepening of your voice and the development of your, what do you call this one? Adam's apple? Yeah, I think it's Adam's apple. Okay, so that's basically it. Now, the last one is the person volition factors, and this refers to the inclination of a person, which creates a social construct which further sets him apart to the others. So, from the word volition, this refers to the own will of the particular person or us, our own volition, our own will to exercise our choices, to exercise our freedom to make decisions and to make choices for ourselves. So now we will move forward to the very significant part of this video, and that is actually the very topic that we intend to discuss, and that is the philosophical perspective. So the objectives are the following. We have to explain the role of philosophy in understanding the self, and also we must discuss the different concepts of the self from the philosophical perspective. We have to differentiate the various concepts of the self and identify their similarities as well. And also, we must develop our own philosophy of the self. So, there. So, first things first, of course, we need to know what is philosophy, what is it about, or what does it mean. So, when we say philosophy, actually, the very definition of it is that it is the study of fundamental nature of knowledge, reality, and existence, especially when considered as an academic discipline. The etymological definition of philosophy is actually the love of wisdom. Now, philosophy employs the inquisitive mind to discover the ultimate causes, reasons, and principles of everything. So, in philosophy we always ask, we always inquire. So it talks about the nature of the self, uh, in which it is a very common topic of interest among the famous philosophers, and in a little while we will be discussing these philosophers one by one and their perspectives about the self. The philosophical framework for understanding the self was first introduced by an ancient Greek philosophers, and that is in the name of Socrates and Plato. Now, Socrates suggests that we have to know thyself. We have to know exactly what is self and what is the qualities that define it. And among all of those philosophers, the agree that the self knowledge is a prerequisite in order for us to have a happy and meaningful life. So now let us move forward to the philosophical perspective. What does the philosophy says about self? Okay, or what do the philosophers have to say about self? So when we say philosophical perspective, guys, it is based on two categorical periods, and these are the classical antiquity, and the other period is the one that is moving towards the modern philosophy. Now, through the Greek times, Greek philosophy was started again by Socrates, of course, with his aphorism and principle of know thyself, which is actually inscribed in the temple of Apollo at Delphi. Now, there's two lens of philosophy of self in Greek times. Again, let me rephrase it. During the Greek times, there are two lines of philosophy. Um, these are rationalism and empiricism. Now, when we say rationalism, this explains self from the standpoint of what is ideal and true and what is not rooted with senses. Whereas empiricism, it is somewhat the opposite of the latter, and according to it, there is no such thing as innate knowledge because according to all the empiricists, all knowledge are derived from experience through the five senses or what is perceived by our brain. So there, we were able now to identify the difference. No, we have distinguished the difference between rationalism and empiricism, and that is the two lenses used by the philosophers during the Great times. Now, moving forward, let us now talk about all those notable philosophers and their perspectives of the self. So, first we have Socrates. Socrates is actually the very first person who was able to say a lot about self. And according to Socrates, he said that the real life is not the physical body, but rather the psyche or the soul. For ancient Greek philosopher Socrates, he said the self is synonymous with the soul. So when we say synonymous, it has of the same meaning, the same importance. No, it is equal to each other. So the self is basically the soul, or when we say the soul, it is actually the self. That is according to Socrates. Uh, According to Socrates as well, he said that the soul is immortal. He believed that every human possesses an immortal soul and that human life does not end at one's death. Socrates explained that the death is the departure of the soul for the eternal world, but one continues to live in the other world after death. In Socrates' concept of reality, it consists of two dichotomous realms. First, the physical realm, and then the um, ideal realm. So, what's the difference between the physical realm and the ideal realm? According to Socrates, the physical realm is changeable, it is transient and imperfect. So, the body belongs to the physical realm. Now, the ideal realm is unchanging, eternal, and immortal, and the soul belongs to the ideal realm. Socrates actually was the very first thinker to focus on the full power of reason on the human self. He said that who we are, who we should be, and who we will become. So he further believed that the soul strives for wisdom and perfection, and the reason is the soul's tool to achieve an exalted state of life. Um, he said that our preoccupation with bodily needs such as food, drink, sex, and pleasure, material possessions, and wealth keep us from attaining wisdom. So, according to him, the things that the body are appreciating to have are the very factors that hampers us in attaining wisdom. He also believes that goodness or beauty is the most important of all. So he said a person can have a meaningful and happy life only if he becomes virtuous and knows the value of himself, and in which I believe is basically true because he could not eternally joyful and actually happy without knowing your virtues and values and worth of your life, isn't it? So Socrates is really brilliant. So going back, Socrates said that a person can have a meaningful and a happy life only if he becomes virtuous and knows the value of himself that can be achieved through constant soul searching. And for him, this is the best. This is best achieved when one tries to separate the body from the soul as much as possible. So again, Socrates believed that soul searching must begin at the source of all knowledge and significance, and that is the self, in which he said that using the Socratic method, the so called introspection, in which it is a way of carefully examining our thoughts and emotions in order to gain self knowledge. So, that's the self according to Socrates. Now let us move forward and let us now talk about his student, and his name is Plato. So, who is Plato? As I mentioned a while ago, he is actually a student of Socrates, and he also studied and explained thoroughly what is the true essence of self, which is then founded by his mentor Socrates. So, Plato suggested that the self is a fundamentally and intellectually entity whose nature exists independent from the physical world. Plato also believed that the self is synonymous with the soul, like Socrates. Plato's philosophy of the self can be explained as a process of self knowledge and purification of the soul. And he also believed that the self consists of three parts, and these are the reason, spirit, or passion, or the physical appetite. Now, according to Plato, reason is the divine essence that enables us to think deeply, makes us wise, wise choices and achieve a true understanding of the eternal truths. Whereas the spirit or passion includes the basic emotions such as love, anger, ambition, aggressiveness, and empathy. And the physical appetite includes our basic biological needs such as hunger, thirst, and also sexual desire. Now, reason, spirit, and physical appetite, these three elements of ourselves are in a dynamic relationship with one another. So they may sometimes be in conflict, but they always work together. Now, when conflict occurs, Plato's believed that it is the responsibility of our reason to sort out things out and to exert control in order to restore a harmonious relationship among the three elements of ourselves. So it is just like a triangle, and whenever this triangle would exchange, or, would somewhat be changing their places and their shapes, the very responsible for having it back together and putting it back together is reason. It's according to Plato. He further believes that genuine happiness can also be achieved by people who constantly makes sure that their reason is in control of their spirits and their appetites. So it's like mind over matter, according to Plato. Your emotions and your body as well must be controlled by your brain. So it should be the brain above anything else. That's according to Plato. Let us now move forward to another famous philosopher during the Greek time, and that is Aristotle. Aristotle is actually a student of Plato, and he explained thoroughly how we could see the essence of self. According to Aristotle, he suggested that the ideal is subsumed in the phenomena. Aristotle called the ideal as essence and the phenomena as a matter, and he emphasized that these two coexist and is dependent with one another. According to Aristotle, the body and the soul are not two separate elements but are one thing. The soul is simply the form of the body and is not capable of existing without the body. So the body and the soul, they totally exist together. They are counted as one. That is according to Aristotle. He said, the soul is that which makes a person. So a person would not and would never ever become a person without having a soul. Because according to Aristotle, the soul is the very essence of the self, and that without the body, the soul cannot exist. The soul dies along with the body. Aristotle also suggested that anything with life has soul, and he said that during his discussion, rather, he always focus or um, center the three kinds of soul possessed by man. So when he was talking about the self, he said that there are three kinds of souls possessed by man, and these are uh, the vegetative soul, the sentient, and the rational. Now, he said that the vegetative includes the physical body that can grow, whereas the sentient includes the sensual desires, the feelings, and the emotions, and lastly, the rational is what makes man human. According to him, if you are not rational, you cannot be considered as a human. He includes that the intellect that makes man know and understand things. So Aristotle gives a huge importance or value to to our intellect because, according to him, it is the intellect that makes a man know and understand things, which is basically true, right? Now, lastly, Aristotle suggests that the rational nature of the self is to live a good, flourishing, and fulfilling life. And I could not agree more. Because what's the glory in living if you do not have a good life, if you do not have a flourishing and fulfilling life? Right? I think we will all agree that if we are not having a good life right now, and if we do not see ourselves flourishing and fulfilled, we will then be having a very miserable life. So these philosophers and their philosophies really has a great scene, a deal when it comes to our daily living. I hope you could see that one as well. Okay, so let's now continue with another philosopher and also a saint. Now talk about Saint Augustine's perspective of the self. According to Saint Augustine, he incorporated the views of Plato to his religious philosophy, and he said that man is a bifurcated nature and it has two aspects. The first one is the imperfect, which is earthly, and the other is capable of reaching immortality. He believes that the goal of the person is to attain communion with the divine, and that the world of materials is not our final home, but only a temporary one, and that the real world is the one where God is. St. Augustine integrated the ideas of Plato and Christianity. He developed a more unified perspective on the body and soul. He said that the soul is what governs and defines the human person or the self, and that the soul is an important element of the man. He said that the soul is united with the body so that man may be entire and complete. So, St. Augustine said that the physical body is different from and inferior to its inhabitant, which is the mortal soul. He described that humankind is created in the image and likeness of God. Thus, he believed that God is transcendent and everything that God created, who is all good, is good. And so, therefore, the human person, being a creation of God, is always geared towards the good. So, the self is known only through knowing God, and self knowledge is a consequence of our knowledge of God. And he also said that knowledge can only be attained, or knowledge can only come by seeing the truth that dwells within us, and the truth of which Saint Augustine spoke refers to the truth of knowing God. So Saint Augustine said that God is transcendent and that the self seeks to be united with God, and that is true faith and reason. So, in his mission to discover the truth on the existence of God, he developed the fundamental concept of the human person, and thus he provided the philosophical principle I am doubting, therefore I am. So, according to him, when you are doubting, it means you are already of existence, and that makes you a man as well. And the very good perspective, because we are all Christians and we are raised to believe in God. Uh, I would leaning towards positive that we will all agree with Saint Augustine that the self is known only to knowing God, and that self knowledge is a consequence of knowing God. And also, we believe that since God is transcendent and that He is our creator. And since God is very good, and so all His creation must also be good. And so that makes us all good, right? Because God created us according to His own image and likeness. And so that is why we are all good looking. Okay, aside from the physical aspect, we also have our good heart, isn't it? And so we are so kind and nice to one another. Because if we're not, then we would be having this anarchy, a very chaotic world, or perhaps we wouldn't exist because we are already dead and killed by a war because there is no peace at all. So you see, Saint Augustine was really good in his perspective, and I'm quite sure that we all agree with his perspective. Okay, now let's move forward to another saint, and that is Saint Thomas Aquinas. St. Thomas Aquinas begins his theory of self knowledge from the claim that all of our self knowledge is dependent on our experience of the world around us. Again, this is interesting. Huh? He said, all of our self knowledge is dependent on our experience of the world around us. So, accordingly, if we have not experienced anything at all, then we wouldn't be knowledgeable at all. And that is according to St. Thomas Aquinas. He rejects a view that was popular at the time, and which is the mind is always on and never sleeping, subconsciously self-aware in the background. Instead, St. Thomas Aquinas argues that our awareness of ourselves is triggered and shaped by our experiences of objects in our environment. He pictures the mind as a sort of undetermined mental pulley that takes shape when it's activated in knowing something. According to St. Thomas Aquinas, the mind is dark and formless, but in the moment of acting, it is lit up to itself from the inside and sees itself engaged in that act. So, in other words, for instance, I would long for a cup of tea, then it means that I am aware that there's a tea, and I am also aware that I myself would want to drink that cup of tea. So, according to St. Thomas Aquinas, all the knowledge that we have are based on our experiences, and we become aware because we are able to experience it. So, he also said that we don't encounter ourselves as isolated individuals, or um, we do not encounter ourselves as isolated minds, but rather always an agents interacting with our environment. So it means that we are continuously evolving and interacting with our environment, and that is the very reason why the labels we apply to ourselves as a gardener, a patient, a coffee lover, a tea lover, or a bookworm. This is being taken from what we do, or what we feel, or what we think towards other things. Yeah. So according to St. Thomas Aquinas, we label ourselves based on the things that we associate with ourselves. So basically, the very common during this pandemic is the plantitos and the plantitas. So we label them based on the things that they are associated with, and that is actually the plants. No, being a plant lover, we call them plantitos and plantitas. And according also to St. Thomas Aquinas, our minds and ourselves are not isolated, but rather we are always an agent interacting with our environment. So we are never stagnant. Yeah, and that is basically true. Moving forward, let us now talk about another very famous philosopher. In fact, he is the father of modern philosophy and he is very much famous for his hyperbolical doubt. And his name is Rene Descartes. Rene Descartes was a dominant philosopher during the Middle Ages. He doubts the existence of his own physical body and he is very famous with the phrase, I think, therefore I am. And it is the keystone of Descartes' concept of self. For him, uh, the act of thinking about the self, of being self conscious, is in itself proof that there is the self. For Descartes, the essence of the self is actually a thinking entity that doubts, understands, analyzes, questions, and reasons. He said that there are two dimensions of the self, and these are the self as a thinking entity and the self as a physical body. And so the thinking self or the soul is the non material, immortal, conscious being and independent of the physical laws of the universe. Whereas the physical body is the material, mortal, non thinking entity, fully governed by the physical laws of nature. According to him, the soul and the body are independent of one another, and each can exist and function without the other. He said that the self as a thinking entity is distinct from the self as a physical body, and in other words, the thinking self can exist independently of the physical body. So, this is quite the opposite of what has been taught earlier, especially according to Saint Augustine. So, according to Rene Descartes, the self as a thinking entity is totally independent from the physical body, and so he believed that our ability to question things is the very proof that we exist. Hence, his very famous phrase, I think, therefore I am. We are done with the father of the modern philosophy, Rene Descartes. Now let us talk about an empiricist philosopher under the name of John Locke. John Locke believed that our identity is not locked in the mind, soul, or body only. He said that there is this concept of the person's memory. He further added that identity is explained in terms of psychological connection between life stages. Hence, our personal identity or the self is to be founded on consciousness, and by consciousness, he means the memory, and not on the substance of either the soul or the body. John Locke said we are the same to the extent that we are conscious of the past and the future thoughts and actions. We are the same in a way as we are conscious of present. And by present, this refers to our both present thoughts and actions. He said, if consciousness is the thought which goes along with the substance, which makes the same person, then personal identity is only founded on the repetitive act of consciousness. So a bit confusing. Let us rephrase this one. John Locke said that consciousness refers to the thought and which also refers to the substance, in which makes the same person. So then, the personal identity is only founded on the repetitive act of consciousness. That's according to John Locke. He said that when a person uh, established a specific consciousness, it will result to a particular memory, and that memory will make that person's personal identity. Okay, so uh, John Locke is also very known for his concept of tabula rasa. I hope you have heard about it. He said that the human mind at birth is tabula rasa, or a blank slate. He felt that the self, or the personal identity, is constructed from the sense of experiences, because according to him, we have to have our consciousness, and from that consciousness, we are able to have a memory of the things that are happening, of our thoughts and of our actions. And basically, this would refer to the experiences that we are experiencing, or more specifically, what we see, what we hear, what we smell, or what we taste, and even feel. So these experiences are responsible in shaping and molding the self throughout a person's life. He said that self consciousness is necessary to a coherent personal identity, or self identity, or knowledge of the self as a person. So, um, he said that consciousness is what makes possible our belief that we are the same identity in different situations, using the power of reason and introspection, which enables the people to understand and achieve accurate conclusions about the self. So, therefore, according to John Locke, the self is consciousness. Because going back to his famous phrase, tabula rasa, when we were born, we actually know nothing. But as we grow, as we evolve, as we go through the life process, we were able to experience a lot of things, and these experiences gives us memory. And these memories are responsible for forming our personal identity, or our self identity, or or the knowledge of ourself as a person. Okay. To to make it simpler, let's put it this way. When you were a kid, you know nothing, but when you are introduced to a gadget, and you were able to experience in using it, then you will have a very keen memory of that particular gadget that you are using, hence gives you the knowledge, no? And I'm sorry, from hence gives you the experience, and that experience of using that particular gadget gives you such knowledge of that particular gadget. And from that from there, you will then somehow shape and form your personal identity. And that's according to John Locke. Most probably, it has something to do. Okay, with the example that I've given you. I think it's basically the reason why we have tech savvy individuals. We have computer geeks individual, because they are so engrossed with the experience, that we have while using those gadgets, and so they are so hooked into it, right? Let us now talk about another philosopher, and his name is David Hume. David Hume is actually an empiricist philosopher. He said that all knowledge is derived from human senses. He is known for his Vandal theory, wherein he said that the person or the self is a collection of impressions, and according to him, impressions are vivid, and impressions are also products of direct experiences, and ideas are the copies of impressions. Uh, he said that there is no self. Hume suggests that if people carefully examine their sense of experiences through the process of introspection, they will discover that there is actually no self. Hume said that what people experience is just a bundle or a collection of different perceptions, impressions, sensations, ideas, or thoughts and images, and that the idea of a personal identity is a result of imagination. So Hume asks us to consider what impression gives us our concept of self. He said that we tend to think of ourselves as selves that are stable entities that exist over time. But no matter how closely we examine our experiences, we will never observe anything beyond a series of transient feelings, sensations, and impressions. He said that we cannot observe ourselves or what we are in a unified way. He said that there is no impression of the self that ties our particular impression together. So, in other words, according to Hume, we can never be directly aware of ourselves, only of what we are experiencing at a particular given moment. According to you, although the relations between our ideas, feelings, and so on may be traced through time by memory, there is no real evidence of any cord that connects them together. So we might be experiencing this thing as of the moment, and this experience would give us an idea, and then this idea would basically become a memory, but there's nothing that connects them together at all. So, in this argument, he also applies to the concept of the soul. According to Hume, he suggests that the self is just a bundle of perceptions like links in a chain. Okay, so a bundle of perceptions like like links of a chain. So Hume is now using a comparison of a soul to a chain. He said to look for a unifying self beyond perception is like looking for a chain apart from the links that constitute it. Hume argues that our concept of self is a result of our natural habit of attributing unified existence to any collection of associated parts. This belief is natural, but there is no logical support for it. He said that it will be argued that a distinction must be drawn between the self and the personhood, or both are distinct but interdependent aspects of the individual. Hume's understanding of the self is basically as a bundle of perceptions, and it will be shown that such an account can maintain identity of the self as an imperfect identity. So there you go. That is Jung's perspective of the self. Now, let us move forward to another philosopher who is very famous and controversial way back then and even until now because of his perspectives, and that is Sigmund Freud. He is actually a psychoanalysis analyst rather, and Sigmund Freud's view of the self was actually a multi-tiered, and it is divided into three categories, and these are the conscious, the preconscious and the unconscious. Unconscious. Again, according to Sigmund Freud, the self has multi-tiered, and these are divided among conscious, preconscious, and unconscious. He said that the self consists in these three layers wherein when we say the conscious self, this is governed by the reality principle and is organized in a way that are rational, practical, and appropriate, whereas the unconscious self contains the basic instinctual drives that would be considered as a socially taboo and is governed by the pleasure principle, and much of the self is determined by the unconscious. And the last layer is the preconscious. And according to Sigmund Freud, the preconscious is located between the conscious and unconscious. So it's in between the conscious and unconscious part of the self that is not threatening and is easily brought to mind. Freud not only theorized about how personality developed over the course of childhood, but he also developed a framework for how overall personality is structured. So, according to Sigmund Freud, the basic driving force for the personality and the behavior is known as the libido. This libidinal energy fuels the three components that basically makes up the personality of the person, and that is the ego and the superego. The id, according to Sigmund Freud, is the aspect of the personality that is present at birth, and it is most primal part of the personality because it drives the people, or it drives us to fulfill our most basic needs, or urges. Okay, and then the ego is the aspect of personality that is charged with controlling the urges of the id and forcing it to behave in a realistic ways. And so the last one is the superego, which is the final aspect of personality, and that is to develop and contains all the ideals, morals, values imbued by our parents and culture. And this part of personality attempts to make the ego behave in a manner which is in accordance to these ideals. So then the ego must moderate between the primal need of the id and the idealistic standards of the superego and the reality. So uh, the very good example for this one is us as being students. Now, if our id will tells us that you are tired, we are tired, and we don't feel good, and so we must just go sleep and take a rest. However, because the ego is working and it is controlling our urge to go to sleep, it will then tells us that you have to finish watching this video and you have to study your discussion because it is the right thing to do. Now, your superego will try to mediate, will try to come up with a balanced decision which would lead to a reasonable action. So the superego would then say, okay, you may take a nap for like 10 minutes for you to rest and relax, and then after which you have to continue studying for your exam. So there, the ego and the superego. That is according to the ever famous Sigmund Freud. Now let's talk about another philosopher in the name of Gilbert Ryle. Now, according to Gilbert Ryle, he said that the self is the way people behave, and that the self is basically our behavior. He also said that the self is not an entity that you can locate, but rather a convenient name to describe all your behaviors. Wow, this is so interesting. He said that the self is best understood as a pattern of behavior and tendency or disposition for a person to behave in a certain way in a certain circumstances. So, Gilbert Ryle is a philosopher who is so known for his metaphor of the university. And it goes something like this, more or less. He said that, for instance, you are tasked to be the tour guide, and there is this pack of individuals, people coming to the university. You met them, and then you tour them around the university. You show them the cafeteria, the library, the dean's office, the president's office. You have shown them also where are the classrooms, and then they ask, where is the university? You see, uh, they are already in the university, but still they are clueless that they are in the university. According to Gilbert Ryle, it is the same with us when we talk about ourselves. He said that as we do ask ourselves, who am I? Who am I meant to be? What's my personality like? He said that we know that we exist, we know that we are we, or I know that I am, and I know that I have this certain personality, but we continuously or we constantly ask ourselves these questions. So, according to Ryle, he said, in order to understand oneself is to look at one's day to day behavior because that is exactly who you are. He said that if you would examine closely your behavior in a day to day basis, then you will be able to come up with your self identity. You will be able to identify your personality. Hence, you will be able to know who you are. That's according to Ryle. Now, his concept of the human self thus provided the philosophical perspective of I act, therefore I am. In short, the self is the same way as the bodily behavior. So, there, that is the self perspective of Gilbert Ryle. Now, let's move forward to the last but not the least philosopher that we will be talking in this lesson, philosophical perspective of understanding the self, and that is Maurice Merleau-Ponty. He is very famous for this phrase, the self is embodied subjectivity. What does it mean? So, according to Ponti, he actually denies dualistic ideas. So, he said the mind and the body cannot be separated. He even articulated the phenomenologist's position in a simple declaration that I live in my body. So, by the lived or life body, Ponti means that an entity can never be objectified or known in a completely objective sort of way, as opposed to the body as object of the dualists. So, for example, when you first wake up in the morning and then you experience that you gradually are expanding your awareness that you are actually awake, and then you are still tired but you have to get up, and then you become aware of where you are, how you actually feel, and then you realize that you have to hurry because you have to start your day. So there is this very distinct awareness. He said that perhaps something along the lines of, oh no, it's time to get up, but I'm sleepy, but I have an important appointment that I cannot be late for, and so on. He noted that at no point do you doubt that I, you refer to yourself, is a single integrated entity, and that is a blending of mental, physical, and emotional structured around and a core identity of yourself. So he said that it is only later when you're reading about Descartes or discussing the possibility of reincarnation with a friend that you begin creating ideas that such as independent minds, bodies, souls, or in the case of Sigmund Freud, and unconscious is actually uh, actually uh, probable to exist. But then if we will just focus on his on Ponti's perspective, he said that all knowledge of ourselves and our world is actually based on the subjective experiences that we have. And so the self can never be truly objectified or known in a completely objective sort of way. And so Ponti concludes that the self is embodied subjectivity. So there you go. We are done discussing the philosophical perspective of understanding the self. And in our slides, I have given you a particular activity for this lesson, and that is to reflect and make a narrative essay on the different philosophical perspectives. Also, you have to identify or point out which of the philosophy of the self wherein you could relate to your own belief and explain how each view impact to your understanding of yourself. And lastly, please make your own philosophy of self. So thank you for watching this video, and thank you for taking the time. I hope that you were able to understand and have a total grasp of the philosophical perspective of understanding the self. If you have some questions, feel free to raise them during our synchronous class meeting. And while watching, if there are things that you do not understand, please write it down so that we could clear whatever doubts and confusions you may have. Again, thank you, and I hope that you will always keep yourself healthy and safety at the same time. Thank you, guys, and God bless.